Yes, I agree. So that's two purposes that we can use. One is for enforcement. One is for learning. And we'll talk about both of those as we go through this morning. Is sort of there'll be a little what it is later, but if you're not familiar with Turnitin, it's one of the leading software applications that exists as a standalone website at Turnitin.com, which I don't believe we have a license to, right? Okay, so don't send people who don't go to Turnitin.com. Rather, this is all integrated within Sakai, and either we have unlimited licenses, or I've never experienced any licensing issues with the number of times that we can use it for the sake of enforcement or education, or perhaps a third category that we'll talk about as we go along this morning as well. What it does is provide a means by which you can, for your own work, I did this for my own professional and scholarly writing as well. I upload my own papers to Turnitin to see where I missed attributions, or where I just, these get a billion monkeys in a room together with a million sturdy typewriters, and they're going to create the Iliad. Well, sometimes I create the Iliad, but it was what Dr. Karl Popper had to say, and I said what he said, and I didn't realize that I said it in his words, but it helps to identify where we might have missed or under attribution within our own scholarship, much less that of our students. How it works is, this is a because I don't know the technology behind it, but a non-technological explanation is that it crawls the web, looks for things that are published on the broad World Wide Web, and then also within scholarly publications and against student papers that have been submitted to the Turnitin database, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well, and looks for sort of semantic search approach, looks for commonalities between the submitter's writing and the writing that has been already extant within online sources. So it's limited to what's already online, but as we know, what's already online is increasingly reflective of what at least is in the current scholarship or the seminal scholarship that exists within each of our respective fields. It does this by two ways. One is a quantitative analysis that says the percentage of suspect text, let's say suspected unoriginal text is the language that Turnitin uses, rather than saying cheating or rather than saying ignorance. It just refers to it as unoriginal. I'll suggest to you that that's a less helpful metric than the harder work, but much easier than back in the old day of going into the qualitative analysis and looking at what they call an originality report, a side-by-side comparison of the student or your own scholarship against what seems to be matched within the resources that are available on the web. Turnitin can help find places where authors might require paraphrasing, rewriting in their own words what's already said, direct quoting or block quoting, or providing just a plain parenthetical citation for something that already exists. Maybe you left out the quotes, maybe they did. They provided the citation but not the page number, so it's just not APA compliant, if APA or MLAS, those maybe some folks' guidebook that we use for academic writing. I'll also talk with you a little bit about, kind of like Gina spoke to, the opportunity for providing multiple opportunities for review through the Turnitin software allows people to become better educated about their own scholarship, attribution, misattribution problems. In my case, it's actually turned me on to resources that I didn't know about that concerned the topic that I was writing about, that I could link out to and then simply learn more about the topic area and maybe integrate it into the writing itself. So, to get started. Let's see, and I'm just trying out my new remote, so far so good. We'll start this morning with a little bit of overview of just what plagiarism is, how at least in GSEP we define it, and the ways that violations of, again, I don't know intent or motivation, but I know it when I see it, right? I know plagiarism when I see it, but there's some exceptions to that as well that I think are important to consider. So what the consequences are of intentional plagiarism, of reaching the conclusion that a student has intentionally plagiarized, and what that means for their academic progress, or lack thereof. We'll also cover the originality checks that Turnitin does, and how to read an originality report, which is really the core of what I hope to share with you this morning. And then lastly, second to lastly, talking about how to create a Turnitin assignment within Sakai. It's pretty straightforward, but if you haven't seen it, maybe a couple minutes demo wouldn't hurt so much. And then lastly, I had actually thought about putting in a proposal for doing this, but I'm still too new at doing it. I'm doing it this term. There's a new function within Turnitin. The company Turnitin provides a variety of products. One of them is the originality check. Another is called GradeMark. And time permitting, there's like a 4-minute video that I can show you about what it does. And time permitting, I can talk with you a little bit about my experience about that also. So the academic catalog, I'm sure it's true for all of the schools, is the contract of sorts, or at least the agreement that GSCP and the university has with our students. It's the place that when we have incidences that occur that look like they might be infractions, we go to and we follow the procedures regarding faculty or student complaints about student work. So this is part of the code of conduct that's listed within the GSCP academic catalog. And it goes on to say that examples of improper conduct for which students are subject to discipline are as follows: dishonesty in any form, including plagiarism, illegal copying of software, knowingly furnishing false information to the university, and then 8 other things as well. This is actually, I think, the first. And further on down the catalog, it also speaks about the disciplinary actions that are possible because of infractions of the code of conduct: dismissal, suspension, probation. So probably not too dissimilar in other schools as well. So this is from GSCP writing support. If you're not familiar with, I'm not certain if other schools do or don't have similar functions, but Gina Meister leads up our writing support center here at GSCP. Is it fair to say largely works with doctoral students?
No, actually masters and doctoral students.
No kidding. Okay, so I teach mostly in the doctoral concentrations within GSCP. I send maybe a bit too much business your way, but I send a lot of business Gina's way with regard to having students that are experience challenges in their academic writing to try to clear that up. And I tend to get them later on during their career, so it's particularly important since they're going on to writing the dissertation that they get some things cleaned up before they move forward. In terms of how to address plagiarism, one of the things that came out of the writing supports materials that was helpful to me was to understand what requires citation and what doesn't. And like anything, the answer is, of course, it depends. Writing support offers these ideas for what does require citation, either direct quotation or parenthetical citation for paraphrasing. Ideas, opinions, or terminology, theories, facts and statistics, graphs, photos, and videos, but common knowledge needn't be cited. And common knowledge we define as general information that can be found in many sources. I think Lincoln's birthday is the one that's given in the material. So, and I tend to be a little bit, I work with my students in a research methods course to prepare a draft of their dissertation proposal so that when we're completed with coursework, they go on to their dissertation work. I tend to be conservative in the way that I coach them because I would rather be harder than their chair may be, so that they're safe when they get out of the course I work with them in. These are 3 types of plagiarism that writing support offers guidance on both through online resources as well as workshops that Gina's office conducts with students and within our classes as well. Of these, Turnitin can be helpful in, let's see if I can figure out the laser. Look at that. Taking it back to the 80s, look at that with the laser. Borrowing ideas without giving credit, and borrowing your own work from another class without permission of both instructors or self-plagiarism. So Turnitin, because it's just an algorithm, it's a heuristic that crunches letters instead of numbers. Well, I guess it converts the letters to numbers. can be particularly helpful with identifying those two things, less so with the second of them, less so with borrowing language without getting credit, particularly if it's not a direct quotation. So, it's not a genie. It can't help you identify ideas that are reflected in a student's or your own original writing that have been said elsewhere, right? It can't prognosticate that way. So, with regard to what the expectations are of attribution, the second to last thing I think that our academic catalog speaks to, that I'll talk about today, is simply the idea of appropriately sourcing material that's taken from other textual or online resources. If you haven't visited OWL, it's a Purdue website, it's terrific. It's got a great set of resources for academic writing, for avoiding plagiarism, for how to handle APA concerns, and it's updated pretty regularly. The website is owl, O-W-L, .english.purdue.edu, owl.english.purdue.edu. And what it suggests for guidance in how to paraphrase is what I think of and talk to my students about is sort of a purposeful or intentional forgetting of what you've read. So what they suggest is that the first thing to do is obviously read the source material until you understand it. And then set it aside and jot down a couple notes. After jotting down a couple notes, write down a few keywords, perhaps on an index card or more likely than not within a database or a Word document or something like that. Then return to the original and see if you've reflected the intention of the author with fidelity. If so, add the quotation marks as necessary. If your billion monkeys end up saying the same thing that the original author said, well, maybe that's the case for direct quotation. And then record the source. If you use EndNote or the library has materials that have integrated citation support from a software perspective, those can help record the source within the document itself and then also generate a references list. So there's many possible consequences, as we visited earlier, with regard to what happens for violations of the Code of Conduct. In a nutshell, though, students might fail a course. So one instance of plagiarism may be sufficient to fail a student. That tends not to happen within the two programs that I'm most involved with, the Educational Leadership Administration Policy Program and the Organizational Leadership Doctoral Concentration. More often than not, what we do is counsel students, consult them, see what happened, try to get to the bottom of things, maybe turn the other cheek, give it a second opportunity, that kind of thing. But this isn't to say that this hasn't happened also. So a student might get an F in a course, but because of the F, they might have their GPA drop to a certain level that they're dismissed from the program or put on probation, or have to repeat the course. Or they may just be outright summarily dismissed from the program. I don't have any recollection of that happening, students being dismissed because of one instance of plagiarism. So, I was trying to come up with a clever name for this. So the epistemology of plagiarism, or how we know that plagiarism is happening. When talking with my students, I let them know, this is the first day of class, I let them know that I don't know how it came to pass that Turnitin identifies a mis or under attribution. All I know is that it says it. So help me understand how that happened, is the conversation that takes place if it gets to that stage. And I should say, since using Turnitin integrated with an assignment, suspected plagiarism, suspected under or misattribution has gone from 30%, like more than you might think. And I don't mean 30% of the students, I mean like all of the students 30% of the time. There's something that's suspect, right? To just about zero. Like I have not had any cause to discipline students because of this. So let's say that this Venn diagram of sorts pie chart, let's call it, represents all the knowledge in the known universe. How much of it do we know? If you were going to cut out your slice of the pie, wee little slice, right? Let's see if I can, right, like that, right? So I think what happens is that we realize that what we know is, we know that we know very little of what the truth is, the capital T truth, right? We know that we don't know a lot more. These are the things that we have yet to learn. And there's probably a lot that we don't know about the reality of the world, about the capital T truth of the world. And I think this is true also in working with students regarding conversations around possible plagiarism. There's instances when the students who know they're plagiarizing, the small percent who would do it willingly, they should know better. They do know better, I suspect. They just kind of think that they're able to get away with it. And so these are what Turnitin identifies, of course it doesn't tell you this, identifies as true positives of plagiarism. But then there's cases that students they don't know that they're plagiarizing. They come to realize, either through the software, through conversations with me, that they've got problems. And what that requires as a solution is education. So in fact, I think that finding mistakes with your own scholarly writing are instructive because they provide opportunities for learning about the ethics of academic writing and what scholarship is within an academic perspective. The third category, the don't know you don't know, the note that I put to myself here was that this is the divide by zero error. This is the 404 screen that you get. I have had students convincingly explain to me that they didn't know that citation was necessary when using ideas either directly or in paraphrase from other sources. These are doctoral students, so they've gone through a master's program and a bachelor's and maybe a couple of each, right? It's rare, but I guess I have two choices. I can either disbelieve them, or I can take them on their word and realize that we've got a larger problem that we have to address. So some possible ways of thinking about this and ways that Turnitin can be useful. Oops. Bless you. So for those that know better, I don't know if you can read from the nosebleed seats. This is from a site called Savage Chickens. The chicken on the left says, "You've got a problem with avoiding personal accountability." And the chicken on the right says, "Yeah, and whose fault is that?" I don't know that I've ever ended up with that contentious of a discussion with a student, but it is a very difficult thing to have a conversation with you're speaking different languages. If you know and they don't know, they have to come to know what you are saying before they can come to understand what you're believing. When we go through the demo, I'll walk through what one of those students' papers look like. For those that know that they don't know, that is, they understand that attribution is important, but they don't particularly have facility with how to do that well. What Turnitin can provide me as an instructor, it doesn't do it itself, but it provides me a way to work with them to self-police their own work and to be able to identify ways that they can improve the quality of their scholarship. And for those that are in sort of the third category, it can, and I love this, this is from apparently a tramway in England. Touching wires causes instant death. $200 fine. Death or worse. So it can be sort of a shock to the system for realizing the importance of this and academic integrity within one's scholarship. We also have within our dissertation procedures the necessity for students to upload their material to Turnitin for a analysis prior to final defense, and the faculty chair is responsible for ensuring that that's done. Waiting until that point, however, is foregone conclusion. It's too late to do that. So this is what Turnitin says about Turnitin. Kind of like I spoke to earlier. Either before you use Turnitin, for those that use Turnitin, or for those that don't, but have had experiences with suspecting mis or under attribution in your or your students' work, how do you know? How do you know epistemologically? So what do you look for? How do you find it? How do you verify that your suspicion has some legs?
Some people Google it.
Yeah. And what would you Google, by the way?
Well, ideally, you're actually putting the whole statement in quotation marks, so it's a specific or concrete search rather than just general words,
Uh-huh.
and hoping to find a hit.
Right. Right, it's phishing.
Right.
And maybe intelligent phishing in the sense that, and I still do this, some of the things that I'll do will be to take unusual phrasings of words and drop them into Google in quotations and look for that, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 words that just seem, Amazon has a system, I think they call it statistically unlikely or something like that. It's words that only this person has said before, other than the monkeys that are doing the typing in some other world, right? So yeah, so that's one way that we used to do it. Any other thoughts? Still do it, too. Yeah, please.
When some phrase seems, or idea seems incongruent with their other previous work that they've turned in, if something seems far beyond or more intelligent or well-worded than how they speak to you or previous assignments, that may be a red flag.
Yeah, great. So if something either within the context, the tone or the voice changes within a particular assignment, you might be suspicious, or if there's a lot of gain that's been accomplished between assignments. Yeah, please.
I was just going to say you might, if you have a database of your own, of your past students' work, something may jump out at you like, I've read that before, I've heard that before, and it might not be from like a textbook or something, but it might be from other student papers. If they,
Yeah, it just
borrowed
sounds a
them
little
from a
familiar.
previous student, sometimes that triggers the search for that.
Mm-hmm. Right, so we might be able to identify just because of what we know. We either know the literature, the published professional literature, or we just know our students' papers and know to look for places that there seem to be unusual, statistically unlikely usages of the same words. We've had an instance too where someone outside of the university had read something written by a student, identified it. It's kind of the same thing. Like, I think I've read this before, and she did read it before. She read it in a book that was pretty much taken verbatim, dropped in, and well before we had the software available. And it was written in a voice that was consistent with the students. The student wrote well. It was just a shortcut that was ill-advised. So that created another set of policy issues as far as how to proceed. Turnitin claims that it has 24 billion web pages, 250 million student papers, and millions of articles indexed. So a pretty big index. I don't know how that compares to its competitors, but it sure seems to be doing pretty well. And when you say Turnitin to people that talk about academic writing and ethics, they'll at least know it. So within Sakai, this is what the plugin looks like. Time permitting, I'll talk a little bit about some great things that IT did to make this even better than the original integration within Turnitin, and integration within Sakai, and even prior to that within Blackboard. But the kind of things that it asks for are some policy issues for what to tell students, how you want to handle the submission of the student paper to that database of however many million student papers that turned in, 250 million student papers, whether or not you want it to submit to that database that Turnitin.com operates. How you want originality reports or these qualitative side-by-side comparisons to be handled, whether you want students to be able to view that report or whether it's just for you, whether you're the cop or they're the self-police. And then what kind of resources you would like, of the 3 that were spoken to, what kind of resources you would like the student submission to be compared against. So the first of these, the quantitative analysis that Turnitin runs, it calls a similarity index. And this is a percentage score, so taking 1,000 words within a document, how many of those 1,000 words end up being suspect as unoriginal? That includes, at least initially, bibliographic references, which almost certainly should be identical for everyone, right? I mean, a bibliographic reference is a bibliographic reference. It also includes direct quotations, so things that are in quotation marks, but it a bit like me, I guess, it corrects. It provides a conservative analysis first. And block quotes as well. Which is maybe interesting, but I think can be a little misleading. Because let's consider a 100-page paper that a student writes. If one page intact is completely plagiarized, would you say that's a case of plagiarism? Would you be concerned? Probably, yeah. So this would only, Turnitin would only show a 1% match in that case. So the percentage index isn't particularly helpful. It color codes it as well, but again, it's red, yellow, green, or something like that. Not real helpful. Clicking through to that, though, to the qualitative analysis can provide more useful information to scan the paper and see where it looks like there might be some difficulty. One of the things I should say too is that because it's just an algorithm that runs, if students put something in quotation marks and don't attribute it properly or just don't attribute it, it's kind of the way to get around all of this. And you're going to read the paper anyhow, so you'd notice it. But if they put the entire paper in quotation marks, you'd get a 0. There would be nothing that shows up as suspected plagiarism. Now, of course, all you have to do is take out the quotations or exclude quoted text, and you'll be okay. So, let me see here. Let me do a quick walkthrough of how to review an originality report within Turnitin. Whoa. My mouse skills are about what they were like after I got this. Not so hot. Okay. So these are 3 student papers that I've anonymized that have been submitted for one of my research methods courses in the past. Just click up here?
I think your PowerPoint went to a link, is that correct?
Yeah, it's open in Chrome though. Chrome still isn't copacetic with Sakai, right?
It's okay.
Is it? I just hadn't logged in. I figure it will log out anyhow. Okay, so this is just a personal site that I set up within Sakai. So these are 3 student papers that they submitted to me. They got the Turnitin report. They chose to submit it as they submitted it, and I had conversations with them around that. To be able to get into, and I'll show you how to set up a Turnitin assignment within Sakai after we complete this. To be able to gain access to it, though, these numbers here are obviously number submitted, number read of number submitted. So you click there, and then this is the access to the Turnitin report. This is the color-coded link that provides the score, or the percentage score, of suspected mis- or under-attribution. It's the same way the students will get access to it as well, also, when they have their reports generated. The report generation generally takes maybe 10, 15 minutes, but we say it can take up to 24 hours just depending on server load. And it seems like it's been getting faster over the past couple of years, so pretty quick. So by clicking that, we get within the student's paper. Right, so immediately it tells us that the bibliography is a lot of the document. We say, okay. So what we have here is on this side a copy of the student paper. I think it's in PDF form. And if you want to download the report itself, you can click the little printer icon down here and download the current view for printing. It downloads a PDF version of this, of the screen. Yep.
Just a second. Okay, so I got my assignment thing right here,
Mhm.
Sakai. I clicked on the number of turn-ins as compared to graded, but I don't have the column that says turned in. I just have status, grade, release.
Probably because you didn't set it up as a Turnitin report.
Oh.
There's a checkbox that you have to do when you set up the assignment.
So I have to go back to my instructional designer, I guess.
Yeah, or it's one checkbox for the most part. So I'll walk through that real quickly after going through. No,
Those were you already used.
no, great question. I was thinking, do I talk about how to set it up or how to read it first? And I thought if I run out of time, I'd rather how to read it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So on the right-hand side, what we have here are the sources that Turnitin identified as the source material possibly coming from. Now, it's worth mentioning this isn't necessarily where it came from. It's where Turnitin indexed it from. So something from Harvard Business Review probably has been rewritten, republished, resourced in a number of places. So it's not telling you that that's the absolute original source, but it's one of the sources that contains the original material, maybe is a better way to put it. Down here, you're able to use the filter function. It's a little, what are those called? Funnel. And what I generally do is exclude quotes. I guess I set it up that way originally. I generally exclude quotes because I'm going to read the document anyhow. If it's in quotation marks, I know to take it as what it says it is. And exclude the bibliography. If you want, you can also choose how many proximal words you would like to be considered fair game. Maybe 3, maybe 5, I don't know. It's up to you. I just leave it as default because I'd rather know more than is true to be able to rule out those false positives. And then apply changes. I think we end up with the same report. Right. And then you can either navigate two ways, either through just scrolling through the document, or by clicking the links, which will take you through them. So here's an instance of something that looks like it's probably a false positive. Promotability has been described as quotation mark, and then it's got the author, year, page number. Well, promotability has been described as the monkeys have already written, so no big surprise there. But when we end up with things like this large highlighted block of text here, financial managers face the same problem as they compete to attract talent in the marketplace, blah, blah, blah. There's not only no parenthetical citation, it appears to be a direct quotation. That's what the highlighting means. It's found those exact words in that exact same sequence elsewhere. This is a don't know student. This is the one that said, I thought that's what you're supposed to do. And actually, it turns out some of the other citations that were in the document that were properly done, I don't even know where they are. We're just looking at one. Here, for Campbell, 1990. As it turned out, in conversation with the student, this entire thing here was plagiarism. The student took the original piece plus the citation and just dropped it in to the work. It's like, no, you can't do that. Talk to Gina, please. So that's one instance. That's the sort of don't know instance. Then we've got a slightly different case. So if it's not done already, I'll drop out the, great, so it's already done. The quotes in the bibliography around. Whoops. So here we've got a lot of partial matches. Nothing too surprising. And then we get down to these kind of things. And what it turned out was, in this case, the student took the material from existing sources, had included it in the references, but just not added the parenthetical citation or the direct quotations that supported that. Now, I didn't mind particularly having the conversation with the student about, well, you know, proofread, check your work, make sure you're doing this right. They knew the rules, but the execution was a little sloppy, right? The self-policing function within Turnitin, hopefully to the extent that students allow it, and I open up the Turnitin, the availability to submit to Turnitin way before the assignments do, so that they can submit it early. And it encourages early submission on top of that. To be able to check their own work and see if these things are happening, just to make sure that they're using due diligence. Right? The third instance is one, and your policies might differ, well, they almost certainly differ than mine, at least in some manner, regarding the reuse of work produced for other courses. So my course is how to write a dissertation proposal. I'm okay with them taking stuff that they developed for other courses and putting it in their dissertation proposal. I mean, it's their original writing. However, prior to IT's changing one of the toggles within the assignment screen, by default, student papers were going to the Turnitin database, so you were getting a lot of false positives because they, unbeknownst to them many times, they'd be uploading their stuff directly to the Turnitin database where it lives, where a fingerprint of it, so Turnitin says, lives, against which all other student submissions can be compared. Now, kind of wolf in sheep's clothing here. Like, the sheep's clothing is that we're identifying students stealing from other students. On the other hand, the wolf behind it is, to my mind, Turnitin has a business model based first and foremost on having this authoritative millions of documents, but secondly on selling a product to universities largely that rely on taking students' intellectual property, if not their copyrighted stuff, with confidential stuff in it. And though they call it a fingerprint, it lives on their server. But that kind of bothers me, right? So IT did a great job of turning the toggle such that it can be turned on, but the default is not for it to be turned on. Very much appreciated. Thank you. So, in this student's case, let's see if I can find it. So this is a paper on gender equity in Norway. The student looks like they cited here, but it's a paraphrase, right? Because it has no page number and no direct quotation marks. But what we don't know is where it exactly came from originally, not necessarily. And in talking with the student, I said, well, it's a paraphrase, but it's matched elsewhere. I won't click through to the link because it might disclose his or her identity. I said, so what happened here? And the student said, well, I had previously written on this topic and I published it in a journal. I said, oh, so this is stuff that you took from your own journal article? And the answer was, yeah. And then the conversation was, okay, well, either directly quote it or just say it differently so that it doesn't pop up. So I guess my point here is that it's necessary not just to, to catch students at cheating, but also to have conversations with them about why that might be the case. Okay, so now I think we get on to the probably last topic. Creating a Turnitin assignment within Sakai. So that setting screen that we looked at earlier, here's how it looks in practice. Okay, so within Sakai, let's say you go to your, whatever your home screen is. I think that's mine. If you go to assignments on the left-hand side, you get your assignment view. If you click add, you can type in the title. In fact, I believe you must type in the title and must type in a description. In the assignment instructions, that's usually where I say submit only a single file with everything in it, because what will happen if you allow multiple resubmissions, each upload overwrites the previous one. So if they're submitting a 3-chapter paper, Chapter 2 overwrites 1, Chapter 3 overwrites 2, and all I've got left is Chapter 3. If they submit it as a single Word document, then I've got it all in one place, with the references and the cover sheet and that kind of thing. So, Up here you can set the open date, which is when you want to make the assignment available to students for their submission and review. I generally set the open date between 2 and 4 weeks before the assignment's due, with the thinking that students don't necessarily know enough more than a month before the assignment's due to submit anything in particular. I guess you could open all of them at the beginning of the term. And less than 2 weeks, well, they're probably getting down to actually doing the writing. So let's say that the assignment was due on, I don't know, February 28th. I would probably set this as the open date. The due date I would set to the 28th. And what I've come to do is, well, I guess there is no February 31, but set the accept until date after the due date, because I almost inevitably end up with students submitting things late and having to beg forgiveness. And I'd much rather them be able to upload to Turnitin rather than me do it on their behalf, which is a separate conversation that's a little more difficult to do. Critically, I check allow resubmissions. I allow them an unlimited number of submissions so that they can keep checking their work prior to the due date of the assignment. Enter in the points for the assignment, which connects to the grade book. Sometimes I'll check the honor pledge thing, but so 2 critical boxes to check. One is allow resubmissions, if you're on board with me about the importance of self-education and self-policing. And then the use Turnitin button. By default, it submits to no Turnitin.com database that they keep the fingerprint of, which I think is a good idea. In fact, I know that there's a policy that's on the IT website that pretty much says remove student name, campus-wide ID, network username, email address, mailing address, phone number, or similar data from electronic assignment file before submission to Turnitin. So maybe we'll have times during the break to talk about more about how that policy came to be. But if you're not submitting to the database anyhow, all the better. Like, even if all that confidential PII is in there, they're not going to have that released outside of the classroom setting. To my mind, having the originality reports that we just looked at generated immediately makes more sense than trying to catch students at the end of the timeline that the assignments made available for. By default, allow students to view reports checked, which provides for that self-education and the multiple uploads and the checking their own work. And I'm completely okay with Turnitin checking against other students' previously uploaded papers. I just don't want their paper without their permission uploaded to Turnitin.com for its storage and archival purposes. So I leave all 3 of these checked, checking the internet and checking publications. After that, you can add some other things that are typical for the assignments thing. Post the assignment. Oh, well, let's pretend that that wasn't the case. Oh yeah, because of the February 31 thing. So, okay. So there we've got the assignment. When students submit, this number will go from 0 to 0 to however many students have submitted. Great. What I will not cover because of the interest of time, but make sure to refer you to, is the grade mark function. Maybe next year I'll talk about grade mark and my experiences with that. What grade mark does is it provides a means to rubber stamp your students' work. If you find yourself always saying cite, 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 or says who, or specious argument, or something like that. I joked when I started here, when I used paper, that I should get a set of 6 or 7 rubber stamps and just bonk, 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 right? Hit students' papers with the common things. GradeMark allows that to be integrated within Sakai, and there's some other solutions if you use Microsoft Word to do it through an auto text feature within Microsoft Word. I guess these materials will be made available. You can either click through, this is the video, or go to the Vimeo link here, which tells you a little bit about it, and it's already integrated within Sakai right now. If you'd like any of the resources that I referred you to, they're on my Delicious site. So this is the link to go to, and it's not particularly categorized, but it's a bunch of stuff related to Turnitin, policy, procedures, technical talks, and walkthroughs of how to use the technology that